My name is DeAndre Fletcher, and this is my presentation on the JP Morgan fraud from 2014. Now, this fraud was very, very advanced, and there were people working behind the scenes at all different angles on this attack, and it was very, very, very interesting. And so, without further ado, I'll just continue on. And in 2014, JP Morgan was hacked. And before I talk about the hack, I would really like to get a little bit more information about JP Morgan so people can actually understand how large of a company JP Morgan is and how powerful they are. JP Morgan is the largest investment company and commercial bank in the United States. They fund a lot of different things. They are one of the top silver traders in the world. And back in 1991, the New York Times wrote about a merger between Chase Manhattan Bank and JP Morgan. So the bank came about from this collaboration or coalition of different banks, and boom, we have JP Morgan. Fast forward, that's a different version. But they have a lot of silver, billions and billions of stockpiles. So this company is very large, and it's one of the strongest companies in the world. And so during this hack in 2014, there were a lot of things compromised, especially on the part of citizens in the United States. There were almost $100 million worth of damage that occurred and took place. There were Israelis, Russians, Americans, and all that working together. Close to 66% of American homes were affected. 7 million small businesses were affected during this data breach, and this was very expansive. And so it was very, very, very large, and it basically caused a huge tear, and it possibly could have caused a spark in cybersecurity, I believe. The main people that were involved was Gary Shalom, Joshua Samuel Aaron, Ziv Orenstein, and Rasputin. No, not Rasputin. Andriel Tyran, in my American accent. He is Russian, but he was not caught at all until 2018. Mind you, these men served some hefty charges, over 20 different counts of identity theft, using unauthorized computer access, securities and fraud wiring, and money laundering. They went through almost $100 million, and this was very, very bad for the country, presumably because this is one of the strongest attacks, one of the largest attacks people have ever seen. And they were very creative with it in their own way. They used their own different techniques, and they really weren't after ruining the bank more so. They were very specific in what they did, and they worked together very well. Joshua Samuel Aaron is quoted as the mastermind, and Andriel Tyran is the superstar program coder that was able to bring everything into fruition. And so moving forward, we ask, what is the pump and dump? Pump and dump is basically when large money individuals or businesses or companies participate in private corruption. They take their money, they buy a penny stock of some sort, then they go and they fish. They tell people using their websites, outreach, and different influencers across the web, and they get people to basically sign up for these different web servers and web avenues, and they get their attention. They get them to then invest in those same stocks that they have already put however much money into. And then when the stock rises, they pull out and it crashes, and then people lose their money. they were able to rack up $2 million at one time doing a pump and dump. It's basically social engineering, and it's working using the stock market. And I'm sure that this technique is not new, and it probably still happens in its own way, because this technique is new to me, and I learned this not even doing stock research, but doing information securities research. And it's still working through email. So people are looking at email as a possible risk and weakness of Americans, Russians, people throughout the world, because even here at our campus, we have had issues with phishing in our own emails of some sorts. So email could still be looked at as the biggest weakness people have, because if you have a person's email, then you obviously are contacting them for a reason. Having someone's email, having someone's unique contact is easy to play on somebody. So the email is looked at as a weakness. And, during this pump and dump, they thought that all they were trying to do was hack into people's things, but they were really trying to access information, to social engineer, to get people to believe whatever was going on. So it was multi-layered attack. It wasn't just a vicious transfer and hack of money. They did use Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies to filter out and transfer their money, but in the end they all fell, not all at the same time. But I do believe that because it was social engineering fraud that was tied in with the hack, the stock market, different passports, different accounts, they were able to continuously do this. And I believe that it's because they continued to do this is why they got caught. I do not believe it's because they were just able to be. I think it's because they stole $100 million. Had they only have stolen $10 million, who's to say that people would have had a problem? Because if you invest into penny stocks, you're not investing much more than $5-10 at a time, trying to turn $5 and $10 into $100 in a matter of days. So people know that they're taking large risks, especially if they're willing to use a penny stock. But the initial hack was used through Heartbleed. It's from SSL Open. And so when you have a flaw in the Open SSL, the open source coded library that's implemented using a TSL and an SSL is easily available to be hacked. And in short, people could use malicious attacks to trick the server into sending sensitive information, say username and passwords. And so this happened to Yahoo. Yahoo was also a victim of a Heartbleed attack, and also JP Morgan and the bank. Basically, it was a multi-factor authentication hack. And even though we really like multi-factor authentication, and it is very, very helpful, it can also be hacked and pushed past. So there's not really a way to prevent all types of social engineering and crimes, because even if you don't have what you need, there are examples within my paper of how people have been able to call wireless companies, internet companies, phone companies, and get phone numbers changed without actually having the right phone number. So people are calling from different numbers and getting the account number changed. And then when the account number changes, the email can change, the passwords can change. And so I think a lot of this is not necessarily programming, but it's more so conning. And when you get the information that you need to be able to get to the people that you need to get to, you are then able to do the things that you need to do. And in this case, it's all about conning. We move forward, and cyber attacks are rising. Cyber and information protection is the priority for most banks. The cybersecurity network is growing. The market is worth billions. It's grown to over 200,000 jobs, and there are 17 trillion in deposits. There's 13 trillion in deposits. There's 10 trillion in loans. So the amount of money that's being used online has increased. The online global security market was 3.5 billion in 2004. 3.5 billion. By 2017, it was over $120 billion. So the amount of increase is exponential, and the money people are willing to pay to secure their information is increasing exponentially, because cybersecurity is becoming the most important facet in life. Because if you can hack somebody socially through cybersecurity reasons, you're able to control a lot of different things. There also was a recall on different forms of Jeeps, I believe, that our book talked about, and basically the Bluetooth was able to be hacked into. So being able to protect yourself from fraud, theft, and social engineering is very important. And this basically is more so focused on social engineering. And so some future implications along with political implications, voting. Voting is huge, or it's becoming more of an issue because people are being more and more aware of the leaders that they choose. And whether or not we want to admit it, as a country, we were hacked by Russia in our previous election. There's plenty of collusion. There were plenty of voting machine issues, even in 2012 with Obama. So we are still very vulnerable, and we need to address the issue. Banking. Banks are starting to add more and more security. They're opening their own security centers. They're guaranteeing customers, their money back. They're doing everything to keep their business, because at the end of the day, banking is important. Politics is important, and it all works together because these banks fund these politicians. So if the banks get frauded, the politicians get frauded, they have their money elsewhere. So if their stock goes down, people pull out and they want their money back. The bank is not always able to get their money back because they're using the money that people have deposited to make their own. They have invested people's money in other places, and if people have more money than the guaranteed 250,000 for most banks, then they're not getting their money. They lose their money. And so some future implications would be more protection. It would cause us to have a larger focus on the things that actually matter. Our government is being attacked constantly. So basically, there's going to be a large focus on improving our cybersecurity, not just for individuals, but for businesses and governments, because individuals look to businesses to be protected. And if you can get to the clients, you're getting to the most vulnerable people, because if you can develop a phishing email that looks and is exactly like the ones that may come from a valid user or an administrator, you're ultimately opening up people to fraud. And so the biggest thing is making sure the businesses don't allow their customers to be accessed. Just like in this fraud hack, they didn't want to get to the bank's systems. They didn't want to go into the bank and steal money from out the bank, because of course that is more monitored and that is more high risk. They wanted to get to the customers and make the customers spend their own money on their own time. So it was basically a social engineering fraud with a lot of different implications. It was a great research, and it was a great thing to look at. And so I had a great time with this. And if you want to learn or look up more information, Google is a great source. JP Morgan fraud hack, and just dive into that information, research some of the names that were mentioned. And thank you for watching my presentation. My name is DeAndre Fletcher.